But now we come to an important turning point. Okay. I know it's been very serious up to this point, because up till now, we've been talking about what happens when the inner work is ignored. Now, we're going to talk about what happens when someone chooses to do it. So, let's go back to the same scenario. Your parents were often busy when you were growing up, right? You developed the belief that maybe you weren't that important, that attention had to be earned. You became sensitive to rejection or distance, and that belief followed you into adulthood. The child who tried to earn attention becomes the adult who people pleases. Someone who struggles to know what they actually want. Someone who ends up chasing careers, relationships, and lifestyles that don't truly align with who they are, which creates chronic stress, pressure, emotional numbness, burnout, relationship tension, and eventually the coping behaviors we talked about earlier. Social media, video games, gambling, shopping, overworking, drugs, alcohol, pornography. But now something different happens. You decide to do something most people never do. You decide to seek emotional health. You decide to finally look inward. And when someone makes that decision, everything begins to change. So the real question becomes, what does that transformation actually look like? Now, we finally arrive at the upside. Like I said, up until this point, we've been talking about what happens when the inner work is ignored. But now we can talk about what life begins to look like when someone decides to do it. So let's go back to the same scenario we've been using. Your parents were busy when you were growing up. They loved you, but they were often working. So as a child, you began forming certain beliefs, like maybe I'm not very important. Maybe attention has to be earned. Maybe love comes from performing well enough to receive it. And those beliefs didn't stay in childhood. They followed you into adulthood. The child who believed attention had to be earned becomes the adult who people pleases. Someone who struggles to know what they actually want. Someone who ends up chasing career relationships and lifestyles that don't truly align with who they are, which creates the stress, burnout, and escapism we talked about earlier. But now something different happens. Key point. You decide to seek emotional health. You decide to finally go inward. And when that decision is made, the process of healing can begin. Maybe you begin working with a coach. And through those conversations, you start to understand something important. There is a reason you feel the way you feel. Your emotions are not random. They are signals. Signals pointing to experiences that shaped you earlier in life. And as you begin to look inward, you start to see the belief that formed in childhood. The belief that attention must be earned. But before you challenge that belief, the first step is something much simpler. Massive key point. You sit with the feeling. Instead of suppressing it like you have for most of your life, you allow yourself to actually feel it. You picture the younger version of yourself, maybe 4 years old, maybe 5, sitting at home, watching television. If you have to close your eyes while I say this, you picture your younger version of yourself, maybe 4 or 5 years old, sitting at home, watching television, waiting for your parents to come home. And even though someone may technically be there with you, even a babysitter, you still feel alone. And for the first time, instead of pushing that feeling away, you sit with it. You acknowledge it. You allow yourself to feel the emotion that younger version of you was carrying. Because for most of your life, those emotions were simply buried, suppressed, and ignored. But healing begins the moment you finally allow them to be seen. When you finally allow yourself to sit with those feelings, a lot can begin to surface. And here's a key point. Emotions that may have been buried for years, feelings like overwhelm, worthlessness, insignificance, embarrassment, jealousy, anger, hostility, disappointment, guilt, despair, a sense of abandonment, feeling victimized, powerlessness, emptiness. And key point, and this is something I want you to really think about and even feel as we talk about it. These are the emotions many people spend their entire lives trying to escape. They distract themselves from them through video games, through pornography, overworking, through shopping, through endless scrolling, through anything that helps them avoid what they're feeling. Even literally meditation. Those emotions, when you sit with them, you allow yourself to feel them. If you need to cry, you cry. If you need to feel anger, you allow that anger to surface. If you need to scream, you scream. Because your body has been holding these emotions for a very long time. And when they are finally allowed to move through you, something begins to change. And once your mind becomes calmer, you can finally look at the belief again. The belief that attention must be earned. And now you begin asking a new question. Does that belief actually make sense? So you begin looking at the circumstances that created it. You realize that when you formed that belief, you were a child. You were in a situation you didn't fully understand. You only saw the outcome. Your parents weren't around very much. And from a child's perspective, it can be easy to interpret that as maybe I'm not important. Maybe attention has to be earned. And sometimes when people first revisit those memories, there can be a lot of blame. Blame towards parents for not being around. And with blame often comes something else. Unforgiveness. And if you hold that in your heart, it can keep the wound alive. But as you begin to look at the situation more clearly, you start to see something different. You begin to understand that your parents didn't deliberately try to stay away from you. They were also living under the pressures of the same system. They were trying to survive, trying to provide, trying to make sure you had food, trying to make sure you had a roof over your head. And the reality was that many of them believed the only way to do that was to work constantly, because that was the only model of life that they were ever taught. They didn't have the tools. They didn't have the understanding. They didn't know that there might be another way of living. So they stayed inside the system. The system that says the only way to survive is by earning a paycheck from a boss. And as you begin to understand the situation more clearly, something else begins to happen. Key point. You start to see that your parents only knew what they knew at the time. They were living inside the same system, the same beliefs, the same pressures. They believed the only way to survive was to work constantly and earn a paycheck. So they did what they thought they had to do. And when you begin to see that, something powerful becomes possible. You can begin to forgive them. Not because what you experienced didn't hurt, but because you now understand the circumstances they were living in. And as you begin putting these pieces together, you start to realize something else.